Hello everyone, Ken and Loey here, and this time I will put out my thoughts on the nerfs of the harvest mechanic. Now, just to put it into perspective, I have played Path of Exile for roughly 2,000 hours on Steam, and I would say that I am mostly just an average player. Now, prior to the beginning of Ritual League, I probably would have said that I was an above average player, but considering the amount of burnout I typically have gotten the past few leagues and drifting away from this game to some of the other games that I play now, I would say that I'm more so just on the average side of things. So to put that into perspective, I have not killed any Awakener 8 Cirrus, for an example, and have no plans on doing so. And also, I haven't really done any super high difficult content. Like, pretty much all I have done is I have done Shaper pre-buff in 3.9. I'm not sure if I have fought him post-buff, to be completely honest. And I'm not sure if I've ever done Uber Elder either. So pretty much I typically do up to the red tier 16 maps with rare and corrupted mods for reference. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents out here on this manifesto here for Grinding Gear Games trying to explain why they wanted to nerf Harvest, and not that I would be able to get anything with those 2 cents anyway. But regardless, I also want to talk about, from my perspective, as what I've said, an average player's perspective on what I think about the game and how it's changed over the years. And I've been playing this game since Breach League, which I think was 2.5, if I'm not mistaken. So, a number of years at the very least. So, going in here, I want to basically highlight the major points on here. I don't want to just read word for word on here. So, before we detail what changes are coming, we want to explain Harvest's initial implementation and our design philosophy around items and crafting. So, when it comes to Grinding Gear Games' item crafting design philosophy, there are definitely better videos out there that are from streamers who play this game more regularly, that are arguably more informed than I am, for sure, especially when it comes to crafting items, because typically I don't craft my own items unless it is leveling, and I'm relatively forced to, and I just use essences or alchemy orbs on bases that I find. So most of this won't actually... Basically, the nerfs that they're doing for Harvest are largely irrelevant to how I play. I typically just grind enough currency to buy the items that I want in the first place. But at the same time, since they're nerfing Harvest, they give me basically no reason to ever really put forth the effort to doing so. So, this statement right here is honestly really disappointing from my perspective. So they say that their initial plan for Harvest crafting: using currency items like Exalted Orbs or Chaos Orbs on your gear is a powerful, risky, and exciting way to improve it. No, it's not. From my perspective, with the limited crafting that I've done, and for anyone who hasn't played Path of Exile, any currency items that you get, you right-click on the currency item and then left-click on your item. So it's arguably not even a quote-unquote crafting system to begin with. But using crafting items like Exalted Orbs pretty much no one uses Exalted Orbs straight up, unless you are within 3 different groups. You either have so much currency that you don't care, so you just use Exalted Orbs just because. Second, you are a new player and you got an Exalted Orb for the first time and you don't know the value of Exalted Orbs and therefore you waste it without knowing about that. Or 3, you are an SSF and therefore you are more inclined to use it rather than trade it. And then Chaos Orbs, I would say I would use Chaos Orbs more on maps than anything else. But on your gear is a powerful, that is extremely debatable considering how random it is. When you break down an item, let's just say I'm trying to make a physical damage weapon, and you look at the physical damage mods, and you want % physical damage, flat physical damage, and for your suffixes you want attack speed and crit. So keep in mind that for that weapon, you have mods that are for each elemental type. So you have flat chaos damage, you have flat fire, cold, lightning, etc., as well as many other different things. And even if you do get the rolls that the different types of mods that you want, you have different tiers of what that roll is. So you could get everything perfect in that sense, and then you get like a tier 10 physical percentage damage mod, and therefore made the item completely useless to you by only having 30% increased physical damage. So that is how many layers of randomness that you need to basically mud your way through in order to get that item. So saying that just using a simple Chaos Orb is powerful is very debatable at best. Risky? Yes, definitely, it is risky. Exciting? From my experience, no, it is not in the slightest. But let's keep going. I probably spent too much time on that point, but I do want to put out quite a bit of context here. So, but these items work equally well on low tier and high level equipment. It is generally best to save them until you're chasing after endgame gear. That is kinda true. Many players would even argue it is best to save them to trade for already crafted items. Yes, I would say that. In either case, valuable currency items on your leveling gear is generally perceived to be non-optimal. That is true for the most part. I do want to mention out there as well, I have only played in a trade league, so I've never done SSF and I've never done hardcore and don't intend on ever doing so. Okay, so when we're designing crafting mechanics, reward system for so basically, this part is basically saying that they put it in leveling to give people a taste of what high-level currency items do without actually using those high-level currency items. So, for an example, you get an Exalt craft without needing to spend an Exalt. And I did play through Harvest League, and I have to say that was probably the best part out of the entire league. Not needing to worry so much about the items of what I'm getting, and also being able to have a direct impact of what I am using was honestly really good, instead of just trading a few Chaos Orbs for whatever I wanted. So I thought that was very successful. Now when it comes to endgame gear, I didn't really do a whole lot with it, but I was able to create at least a pretty decent two-handed axe from Harvest, so I mean, it was good enough to pretty easily craft viable stuff for at least I would say, yellow maps-ish worth of stuff. So, integrating Harvest and Core. So basically, most of all of this is just saying that people were creating quote-unquote too powerful of items too easily, and therefore, because of that, Harvest became almost mandatory in their opinion in order to create powerful stuff, or at least the best stuff, which I haven't really done anything with Harvest when it came into the core, because I pretty much got to level 89 in Ritual and got to early red maps, and I pretty much stopped because I was playing other games. So I really don't know how powerful the changed Harvest was. I do remember in Harvest League it was very powerful, but it was very annoying to deal with because you had to place the seeds yourself, you had to collect the seeds yourself, and you also needed to figure out the best optimal way of setting up your grove in order to make sure that the higher tier seed crafts were done right. But I do want to highlight this part here. Our problem with all of this can be summarized with the following thought. Why would I use a regular Exalted Divine and Null Orb when I can just do it through Harvest? I mean, that's good to bring up, and I do get their point, but the problem is that for the most part, well, Divine Orbs and Annulment Orbs, I would say yes, but for most people, I don't think they would use an Annulment Orb at all. Divine Orbs, depending on what it is, sure, but as far as I can tell, no one uses straight up Exalted Orbs, except for the 3 groups that I talked about earlier. So the fact that they put that in there when literally, like, let's just say only 5% of people of the higher end that get into maps even use this, and they're using that as justification, is definitely something. And as for me, it's more of, because crafting is so annoying, why would I bother crafting and using orbs at all, and just using those orbs to give to other people in order to buy the item that I want? So it's so I can basically just use their thought here for just not using their crafting system whatsoever, except for the crafting bench, but that's because you're guaranteed to get at least 1 mod for your item, so I don't know if you really want to count that. So yeah. The entire rest of Path of Exile crafting system is somewhat redundant with Harvest crafting in its current form. I mean, again, I'm not really entirely sure because I haven't interacted with it when it became into core, so I can't speak from experience. Now, my friend Warmonger, he has indeed used Harvest in core, and he said that it was more powerful than every other way of crafting at the moment, but I do want to get into some of this before I talk more about that. So, Path of Exile's item philosophy. At its core, Path of Exile is a game about acquisition of powerful items. Now, that is somewhat true, but the way that I play, and if basically all you're doing is gaining currency in order to trade with other people in order to get items, it's that part is, I mean, it's true, but also somewhat not the focus. Like, I would say it's more so of, like, how I would phrase it is, at its core, Path of Exile is a game about making a build for yourself and making it feel as good as possible. And the acquisition of powerful items is how you make that said build work as well as you can. So whatever. When we were designing Path of Exile, a critical aspect of item acquisition is through random rather than deterministic means. Which, in all honesty, with how Path of Exile runs, this is extremely annoying, because how many of people have said it when criticizing this post is that when you are doing a character and you're working towards building them up as good as possible, if everything you do to improve that character is random, it's really hard to set goals for yourself. I mean, unless you're just saving up currency to just buy what you need, but I did kind of want to bring that up. When you defeat monsters and bosses, you receive random items. Yep. When you approach Kadiro for a valuable item, you are offered a random one rather than one that you can control. So this is basically saying that they wanted powerful items to be hard to acquire, which I understand that. So yes, having some randomness to it is important in that aspect. But also having very limited amounts of deterministic means is also frustrating. So I'll get into that in a little bit. It's also important that items are hard to perfect. I agree with that. Ideally, there's significant diminishing returns in currency in the crafting process. So basically they want it so that if you want a perfect item, you have to put an immense amount of currency into it to perfect that item, which I agree. We feel that the current state of harvest crafting runs against both of those important philosophies. We know that many players love for us to keep the deterministic crafting in the game because it enables people to complete their items far more quickly than otherwise would. But then there would be quickly nothing left to achieve. Well, that really depends on the person, because if you make it so that end game perfect stuff is achievable so that they can max out a build, it also in some ways encourages people to start other builds and experiment. But if you can't, well, then you're left with a single build through an entire league, which, keep in mind, is only 3 months typically. So let's just say with how I play, I get burned out because I get burnt out for multiple reasons, but a reason is that I never reach like the full potential of a character, and I don't mean that by having the absolute best perfect items. I mean having them functioning and being able to comfortably do tier 16 maps. Like, that to me is what I set out to achieve. I don't set out to achieve a character that can easily do 5-layered delirium maps, for an example, like that. So, I mean, you could argue that both ways. It was an interesting experiment, and we understand that some people are likely to be attached to this, and yada yada yada. This was basically the biggest joke out of this entire thing right here. This statement right here. This sentiment was summed up by a member of our design team who recently said, "We don't want to take away the feeling of closing your eyes and exalting an item, scared to see whether you ruined it or not." This right here, in my opinion, is what makes Path of Exile really irritating to me. And when I talk about the state of the game and what my opinions are of it, this ties into that. And I think Path of Exile is really trying to develop stuff with the mind of higher end players in mind, rather than the average player, which in some ways is good, but in other ways it isn't. Because the top end people, well, especially the really top end people, they can get anything that they want regardless. Now, the higher end people that aren't the top, well, then maybe this will affect them somewhat, but probably not hugely. But the average player, this is what it affects the most. The people who can't play this game for many hours every day. And this right here, we don't want to take away the feeling of closing your eyes and exalting an item. First of all, pretty much no one exalts an item straight up. And the second, being scared that you ruined a decent item to being completely useless, that is annoying more than anything else. It makes it so that I feel like all the investment that I put into whatever item that I'm working on to all of a sudden get a mod that, well, exalting an item doesn't typically just straight up ruin an item. It pretty much just gives you a mod that is suboptimal. So, I mean, that won't necessarily do it, but if I'm using like any other currency that changes mods like add or remove, add and remove, I should say, like annulment orbs or whatever, that makes it so that all the investment that I made into that item basically gives me nothing. And that is not a feeling that I want to have. And I don't find that to be exciting in the slightest. So, when it comes to the nerfs, like I said before, for me personally, and especially this post, like, their nerfs to Harvest is kind of irrelevant to me personally. It is their statements of stuff like this that really made me think about making this video, is because of this. Not because of them nerfing Harvest in a way that makes it basically uninteresting, and or at the very least it does not encourage me to do anything with it. So basically they're reducing the amount of seeds, but they're making it so that you get more encounters, so it balances out for the most part. They remove some mods that have overly deterministic behavior, such as all annulment mods that are specific, I think. Okay, it says remove all annulment mods other than the ones that remove a mod that isn't a specific type, I think. And all type specific divine mobs. Honestly, I don't see how specific type divine mods do anything important other than allow you to min-max an already well-rolled item. Like, if you have tier 1 rolls on an item, and you specific divine it to be a slightly better end of that tier 1 roll, like, I mean, you could arguably do that with regular divine orbs, so the fact that they're removing that is kind of weird. The other one, removing the annul ones that are, from what I understand, their wording is kind of, I don't know. Specific annulment mods, I mean, yeah, but that isn't really the worst thing in my mind. Like, it definitely was probably one of the most useful crafts, but I don't know. But this one is pretty much the most frustrating one out of all this. Crafts that add specific mods like physical modifiers, for an example, to items can no longer be applied. They can no longer be applied to influence items. This was a major facepalm to me because basically in endgame, pretty much everyone uses at least one influenced item. So the fact that they're making it harder to craft an influenced item basically means that Harvest is just dead now after this, basically, because, or well, in endgame anyway, because pretty much all of the mods that were introduced in 3.9, the Conquerors update, when they basically super buffed a lot of the well, I wouldn't say super buffed like endgame content, but they buffed everything by a pretty significant margin. It pretty much made it so that at the very least the average player, the influence mods were very desirable in order to make up that difference. And many of the influence mods are very quality of life type mods that make it so that your character feels much better than it ever did before. And the mods that I'm talking about are like the explode mod for the chest. Now, I wouldn't say that an explode mod is required, but it certainly helps with making your build feel good when clearing a map. The other important one is Tailwind and or Elusive Boots. Those were pretty much a staple as soon as they came out, because going flat out 8% faster and being able to cast and attack 8% faster overall just feels so good to have. Other staples are like the +1 level of all specific gems and stuff for amulets. There are also other specific ones. But basically what I'm saying is that for endgame, I can pretty much guarantee you that most people are going to have at least 1 or 2 influenced items, and that basically means that Harvest is literally unusable when crafting influenced items. So that's a really big slap in the face, in all honesty. So basically now you have to craft your item as best you can, and then use an Awakener orb to hopefully get what you want. Again, I'm not super familiar with using orbs like that, but it still, for the most part, makes Harvest pretty much unusable for most people who want to engage in it now. Overall, this is undoubtedly a heavy nerf to high-end Harvest crafting, which, again, if a lot of your items are influenced, it basically becomes not a heavy nerf, it becomes a tombstone to it. But we strongly believe it is in Path of Exile's best interest going forward, and still a lot of compelling Harvest crafts that make the Grove worth running at any point in map progression. I would say that, yeah, it's worth running in early maps, again, but if you want to do, like, red maps, then I would say no, not really. And if you see some of these posts here, some of them, are people who are saying, good, I don't do anything with it anyway. But after you get past like the typical like 2 or 3 pages of mostly unproductive statements, meh, the POG stuff. I mean, there are some, more lengthy stuff that is more talked about stuff. But this post right here was, I thought, was one of the best ones. So, he's talking about the exalting item, and this is a person that has a Demigod's Authority, which is one of the rarest items in the game, and 2 mirrors, which are also extremely rare items. I have never gotten a mirror of Calandra throughout my entire playtime of Path of Exile, to keep that into perspective. So he's saying that is something that 99.9% of the players will ever do, and I 100% agree with that. And he's saying, I'm a wealthy player. I have done 4,000 hours of this game. This experience described here simply does not exist. And he's basically talking about, like, basically they want crafting to be gambling, and that's not really fun and engaging, and not really. I have done fossil crafting for some of my claws in Metamorph League when I was doing my Cyclone Duelist, and Warmonger can correct me in the comments if he so desires, but I'm pretty sure we spent like over 10 exalts worth of fossils in order to get good claws. Like, probably on the higher end. But the thing is that when we looked at the price of claws that we made compared to what we could have just gotten with currency, it was pretty much 1-to-1. If not even more so towards the trading side. So basically, in my mind, it's like, why would I ever use crafting if I can just buy what I'm going to use anyway for the same cost as crafting? I mean, yeah, I could have gotten lucky, but at the same time, I could have gotten even more unlucky and spent even more currency not getting what I need. So basically, these changes, they make it so that for me, as an average player, I will not I will not be crafting my own items with these changes. When I did my Harvest League review, I said that this was pretty much the very first update that actually encouraged me to craft items for myself. And I was inclined to do so, even though that I would say the interactions and execution of it wasn't very exciting, and in more cases it was more of a flow breaker, to be honest. But at the same time, it was the best style of crafting out of everything available. To me, crafting is pretty much, fossils are basically the best way to go now. Sure, you can use an essence to guarantee one of the mods, and you can use a crafting bench to guarantee your second, or if you use a multi-mod, I guess you could make sure that you have 3 mods if you spend Exalted Orbs that way. But at the same time, though, if you're really going for really high-end mods without multi-modding, fossils are basically one of the only options. Now, I'm sure that there's other ways of crafting, or if you want, you can use essences to a high degree, but from someone's perspective of who doesn't craft, the way that I see it, fossils are pretty much the only way to go now. And that is mostly because when I talked to Warmonger, and with that statement before, when he said that Harvest crafting was by far the most powerful crafting, and that their nerfs, it should be nerfed by that standard. The problem is that all other methods of crafting are garbage. So when you have a system that is basically not garbage, but every other option is garbage, of course it's going to be overpowered. And the other thing too is that when I have been watching these videos talking about this post, they were basically saying that even though that, yeah, it is much easier to get the perfect item, not everyone is getting perfect items. So for an example, a perfect helmet or chest armor, especially with Maven orbs in the game, and if you want to risk it all and vol it, those items, what before Harvest probably would have been 1 to 5, are now in the realms of 50, and therefore the prices of said items are, instead of being mere tier items, they're now 50 exalts. You know, I mean, sure, but the thing is that it's not like there's 1,000 of them now, you know, or more. And so basically, if someone puts in the time to learn Harvest and learn how to craft stuff, there is more returns on that to encourage them to do so, but there isn't so much perfect items that it breaks the economy. And more so, people are using Harvest just to get good enough items, or above average items to do that tier 16 maps, to do that Awakener 8 Cirrus, rather than mere tier perfect items. Or, I guess, 50 Exalt perfect items. You know, whatever. So basically, it's making it so the average player, instead of being encouraged to craft their own stuff, it makes it so that why would I craft anything when I would just buy stuff from people who are willing to spend their currency on crafting, that have so much currency that they're not going to lose anything if they don't craft something that is good. You know, the people who spend multiple hours per day playing the game and doing endgame content within 2 or 3 days, doing red tier 16 maps like day 1 or day 2. You know, these types of people. And those are the people who are completely unaffected by this, pretty much whatsoever. Because, sure, they might not be able to use Harvest, but if they were getting to that point anyway, they're probably going to get the items that they want without using Harvest at all. So it pretty much just harms the average player who only plays 1 or 2 hours every day or every other day, that wants to create their own gear. This option is basically ripped away from them if they want influenced items. So, with that being said, I want to talk about the state of the game from my perspective of playing this game over the years. So, like I've said, I have played since Breach League years ago. And I would say we never really got good, like really good with the game until probably 3.8, which I don't remember what 3.8 was, but that was pretty much the first time me and Warmonger did the Shaper and regularly did tier 16 maps. And with 3.9, all of the buffs for endgame content, I believe, was completely justified, but they did overly buff the early game content. Now, I wanted to bring this up because I pretty much see no one talking about this, but when you come to bosses like Brutus, Merveil, even to some degree Vol Oversoul, they were substantially buffed to the degree that I find to be really frustrating. So, me being a Path of Exile player that knows, for the most part, what he's doing, I can get to maps within probably 10 to 15 hours worth of game time. So, within like 3 days of the league being out, which I think is pretty decent. I mean, obviously it's not on the top end, but it's decent. And when a player like me has trouble doing Merveil now because they buffed her so much, there's kind of a problem, because if someone who knows what he's doing is struggling against an early game boss, how do you expect new players to figure that out? And I'm not talking about Merveil, like, on a concept level, she's not exactly hard. The reason why she's hard is because, for whatever reason, they decided to make it so that in her second phase, especially, I would say like 75% of the arena or more is covered with those water geyser things. And I see a lot of bosses, especially like newer bosses, seems to rely on arena denial in order to make them hard. Like, for an example, make the arena 90% smaller, therefore they can't dodge anything, and therefore it becomes hard because you can't dodge anything. You know, like the Brine King is another extremely annoying one. So basically, because of that, Merveil, you're pretty much required to have like over 40% cold resistance in order to do that boss comfortably. And pretty much the main way to do that is to get Sapphire Rings early, get 50% or more cold res, and therefore you're probably going to be good. But a new player is probably not going to know about the vendor recipes in order to get Sapphire Rings in order to do that. So they're probably going to have a frustrating time. Now Brutus, I mean, that's kind of a harder one because he's pretty much the same as he used to be. He just hits harder and has a lot more health. So depending on what your build is, there isn't really too much. Like, it's just it's completely different. But I would say Merveil specifically was just really overbuffed. And then Vol Oversoul, I mean, he pretty much just does the same that he did before, but his laser beam attack comes out way too quickly. It's pretty much nearly impossible to dodge unless you are really on top of things. And because of how much damage that does, it pretty much two-shots you. So if you get stunned by the first hit, well, then you're just dying due to the nature of that. So there's that. So that's not the biggest thing, but I just thought that I would talk about that because it seemed that no one cared about that, because everyone who plays Path of Exile is someone who does red tier 16 maps, apparently, when it comes to stuff like this. Now, what really got to me was Delirium League. Definitely opened my eyes to, especially with this design philosophy stuff that they're talking about and catering to the higher end players. Delirium was a perfect example of them doing that while sacrificing the fun of the game. If you've ever done Delirium, you'll know how many on-death effects there are and how many of the red explodey things that shows up. I think they did tone that down so it isn't nearly as numerous as it was in the league itself, but it's still prevalent there. And if you don't know what you're doing, those can be extremely annoying, or depending on what type of build you're doing. Most people who do Delirium probably have really good builds, so it probably isn't an issue. But especially in Delirium League, it was pretty much their design philosophy was, oh, well, since players are killing everything so fast, we need to add on death effects on there in order to basically make the game hard for them. But the problem is that all of the players that they described are not being affected by those, because they have so much movement speed and they have so much clear speed that they are not in the blast of the on-death effects when the monster dies. They're going to be way past them. And the same thing with the red explodey thing. So basically it was another decision that basically took away from the game and made Delirium annoying to deal with for the sake of something that doesn't even affect its prime demographic. And these changes here that they're rolling out for this basically sounds like it is just that. It is something that affects the average player, or maybe slightly above average player, but the people who are making mirror tier items from this will probably get mirror tier items anyway, or at least close to it than before. Well, maybe not than before, but I mean, they're gonna get high-end items anyway. So this doesn't affect them like they want it to. So it just doesn't make any sense. And I really want to talk, when talking about this part here, I watched a video, I think it was called, the channel was Path of Math, and he was talking about, I think he said in there that Grinding game seems to want Path of Exile to be in the Stone Age, but then this is 2021. And when they finally make a crafting system worth using, they basically nerf it so hard that it's not, because of this influence stuff especially. So then what is the point in even dealing with it? So it's just really baffling to me about this whole idea that, oh, well, we want the excitement of right-clicking your mouse button on a Chaos Orb and left-clicking your item and having a 1 in 10,000 chance, if not higher than that, of getting something decent. It's just, as many people have put on there, do they even play their game to, or understand what most players think about this? And the same thing goes with like the auction house thing. So many players have asked for an auction house thing for trading, so we don't need to interact with other players in order to trade. And basically, Grinding Games basically said, we don't want to add that because it would take away from the interaction from players. But you're not really interacting with players when you're trading. You're interrupting what they're doing, making them come to their hideout. You say to them, I want to buy your item. They invite you. You go to their hideout. You trade your items. And you say, good luck. And that's it. Like you're not making friends with trading in Path of Exile. They're going to go back to what they're doing. And you're going to go back to what you're doing. So why do I need to interrupt what they're doing in order to get the item that they have listed? It just doesn't make any sense. So in the sense, Path of Exile wants to be like the old MMO days of, well, I haven't played World of Warcraft, but I can imagine World of Warcraft, especially Guild Wars 1, game that I've played, or Diablo 2 if it was an MMO, like that whole old school thing of you need to directly trade with people or interact with people in order to do stuff. I mean, that's great and all, if it was back in the middle of the 2000s when people actually interacted with people, frankly, on the internet. But in 2021, especially with Path of Exile is a game that's not even like these other MMOs to begin with, because everything is so fast-paced, and when you go into maps, you only have 6 portals. So in order to trade with someone, you're sacrificing a portal, and depending on what you're doing, that could be very impactful on how much loot you can get. So just from the way Path of Exile is made, it doesn't even make sense. So yeah, it just seems like the development team, or at the very least the people who are in charge of a lot of these core things, want this game to be like late 2000s or early 2010s type of game that pretty much hardly anyone wants anymore. And any idea that they move forward that progresses that, they nerf it because it's against the item philosophy that most people... Well, I mean, I agree with what they're saying, but their execution of it is garbage. Like, the whole idea of picking up an item, examining it, and being excited about what I could get, it's like the chances of getting something off of the ground especially is so low that even pretty much loot filters are required, and even with loot filters, you don't pick up anything unless it's like influence now, or it's a top base. You know? So if that's not, if they wanted that excitement to come back for picking up items and having excitement of examining them or crafting stuff, then why are those said systems such garbage? When it comes to the auction house, I think I saw maybe it was a Reddit post or something, or maybe even a statement from GGG. They were saying that, oh, if we do this, we would need to remove like 75% of the items, because then, you know, because of trading being so much easier. And I don't remember the exact reasoning, but in my mind, it's like, do it. Remove 75% of the garbage I don't pick up anyway, so that I don't need to interrupt someone's whatever they're doing in order to trade with them. Therefore, I get the item that they have listed for the price that they are asking for, and hopefully everyone's happy. But like they say here, that's not the Path of Exile they want to make. They seem to want Path of Exile to be like an old school game, and based on the responses, or at least besides, well, there's either people who just don't like it because they don't interact with crafting at all, or they think it's OP, but the people that this really affects, they have said that these are terrible changes, and they're, or at the very least, even if these changes are justified, their reasoning is hot garbage. So like, I agree with Warmonger on his statement on everything of Harvest was too powerful, therefore it justified a nerf, but only because all of the other systems that we have available are such trash that this inherently becomes overpowered. So, yeah. And as for the state of the game, it does seem to me that more and more League mechanics are catered towards the higher end players as well. Like, Delirium was pretty much like the perfect thing if they didn't have the on-death effect annoyances and the red explode things. Then it probably would have been one of the best League mechanics ever when it came to endgame content. But it seems like for every good idea that they have that could have been really amazing, they have in the back of their mind, well, this has to affect the people that are smashing all of the content. We need to make it harder. But then all of their things that they put on there don't even affect them realistically, and only harms all of the people who are not the top end players. So I don't know. Like, overall, my opinion of this is that Harvest, being as it was, I think it kind of should be a little bit, I mean, really a little bit better than the other methods of crafting, because it was more complicated and you only got 10 crafts that you could store, and therefore, like, there was enough randomness to it and all that, and it isn't like fossils. Like, there's a little bit more to it than just putting fossils in a resonator and using it like a chaos orb. And therefore, in my mind, it should be at least a little bit better. Like, maybe not as much as it apparently was, but yeah. So that's pretty much where I'm gonna put it for this video. I just wanted to put my 2 cents in there from arguably a casual player's point of view, and overall their philosophy on a lot of things, in my mind, I really disagree with when it comes to reasoning of nerfing certain things. Like, for an example, aura stacking was one of those things where I agreed that it was probably too powerful, but at the same time it required so much currency investment in order to make an optimal aura bot that, and the fact that most aura bots you needed other players to carry them, that nerfing it as hard as they did didn't really justify it. But at the same time, though, I guess it, after having my own, they didn't nerf it to such a degree that it broke aura characters. But especially the the curse stacking nerfs, I really don't get what the point of those were. But yeah, some of the stuff, it turns out to be, after looking back on it, it was some of these are fine, but at the same time, though, it seems like every time there's fun involved, they do something that makes the game less fun. as sad as that is to say. So with that out of the way, I would having some discussion in the comments would be good, whether you agree with me or not. And of course, I'm not a game developer. And I don't play as much as many people are, but from the sound of it, Harvest was not used to get the level of gear on the scale that they're claiming in order to justify absolutely gutting it. So I don't know. But as long as it doesn't get too fiery down there, having healthy discussion in the comments would be quite good. But I will admit that there are more qualified people to talk about this, with the streamers and everything, who play so much every day. It's basically their job. And I'm just someone who easily gets burnt out in the game and stop by the time I get to level 90, and typically. So with that, thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.